Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for the Arab Society for Conflict Studies to welcome you to this book launch and discussion of Iran's grand strategy. This book arrives at a pivotal moment, not only for Iran, but for the Middle East and the international order more broadly. For decades, Iran has been at the center of regional turbulence, from wars and proxy conflicts to nuclear diplomacy, sanctions regimes, and shifting alliances. Yet, much of the discussion about Iran tends to range between alarmism and reductionism. Tehran is often portrayed as reactive, ideological, or purely disruptive. What this book challenges us to consider is something more complex and more consequential, that Iran's behavior, whether one agrees with it or not, reflects a coherent and evolving grand strategy. Iran's grand strategy book invites us to move beyond episodic analysis, beyond focusing only on the nuclear file, proxy networks, or individual leaders, and instead to ask a deeper question. How does Iran understand its place in the region and the world? What long-term objectives guide its policies? How has it adapted to war with Iraq, isolation, sanctions, US military presence, regional uprisings, and shifting global power balances? We are especially fortunate to have with us today the author, Professor Vali Nasr. Vali Nasr is one of the world's leading scholars of Middle East politics and international relations. He is a professor of international affairs and Middle East studies at Johns Hopkins University. He previously served as senior advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan at the U.S. Department of State, giving him rare insights into the intersection of scholarship and policy. Professor Nasr is the author of numerous influential books, including The Shia Revival and The Dispensable Nation, all of which have shaped global debates about political Islam, regional order, and U.S. foreign policy in the region. We are equally pleased to have with us Dr. Mahjoob Zweiri, a distinguished scholar of Iran and Middle East politics, who will serve as the discussant for this event's conversation. Please join the Arab Society for Conflict Studies in welcoming Professor Vali Nasr and Mahjoob Zweiri. Welcome again, Vali and Mahjoob, and thank you, Vali, for sharing with us your thoughts on this great book that we have here that tells us a lot about Iran's strategy and foreign policy. We're delighted that you're with us and that you share with us your thoughts. Please tell us, what is the main argument of this book? What is it presenting? What are you telling us that we should understand about Iran's foreign policy?
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. It's wonderful to be with you and also to discuss my new book, Iran's Grand Strategy. I spent a good portion of the past 10 years thinking about this subject and researching it. And I was largely driven by the fact that for the countries in the region, as well as for Europe and the United States, Iran has become a very big foreign policy challenge and also a simultaneously big foreign policy enigma. In other words, why is this country persisting despite enormous amount of cost on a foreign policy path that has been conflictual. We're now 47 years from the Iranian Revolution, and Iran has not veered off this path. At the same time, it seemed to me that there is a lot of theories out there, very common assumptions about Iran, such as like Iran wants to export its revolution, or Iran behaves the way it does because of religious ideology, that it's driven by religion. And to me, these seem to be missing the point. In other words, yes, there's a lot of challenges and problems with Iran's foreign policy. And in fact, we're at a period where we're seeing that foreign policy in great deal of crisis. But it is, to me, it seemed to be too simplistic to assume that it is Shia religion that is driving Iran's behavior, or Iran is acting as it does because a lot of the chief decision makers in Iran have a turban on their head, or somehow Iran is trying to conquer the world. And I was also fortunate with the fact that there is enormous amount of literature in Iran on foreign policy as well as domestic policy issues. I mean, it's a very peculiar thing about Iran that it's a closed society, an authoritarian system, but at the same time, there is enormous amount of material in the public, from debates, forums, online, newspaper analysis, academic analysis, interviews, oral history interviews, and a great deal of memoirs that have been written, which lay out debates as well as discuss the logic behind the way in which Iran approaches its foreign policy thinking. I mean, the argument of my book is, yes, Iran is a religious state. It is an Islamic republic. But fundamentally, it's driven by a national security doctrine, that it has a conception of national security and national interest, which, as much as it might be problematic or mistaken or threatening to its neighbors and the West, nevertheless, it should be understood as a national security strategy, just like we think about Russia or we think about China or any other country. And largely, this national security interest, in my opinion, comes from the very beginning of the thinking of the Iranian Revolution, which saw itself as liberating Iran from imperialistic and colonialistic hegemony of the outside. I mean, the Iranian history looms large over Iranian debates, regardless of what political faction you belong to. Iranians are keenly aware of the long 19th century during which Iran was deeply penetrated by colonial interests of Russia, England, France. And in that sense, it's not different from the Arab world. And then, the issues of what happened in the 20th century, occupation of Iran during World War II, and particularly the contentious issue of a military coup in 1953, which overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh. And I debate that in the book very extensively, and about why that's such an important issue. But the revolutionaries in Iran, particularly Ayatollah Khomeini, but also Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries, which were very important in the 1977 to 1980 time period, had a very exaggerated view of Iran's history, in the sense that Iran really was not independent until 1979. That the Iranian Revolution for the first time made Iran an independent country. Wow. I mean, even about a month ago, former Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif had an interview with the American journal Foreign Policy, in which he said, and I've heard this and seen it written in Iran and repeated, that the Islamic Republic is the first government in Iran to have given the country genuine independence over 200 years.
Wow.
Now, this is historically a highly contentious issue, because it also assumes that Iran was basically an American colony from 1953 to 1979.
Yeah.
But it speaks to the mindset of the Islamic Republic, that it sees itself as the liberator of Iran. And in fact, I believe that Ayatollah Khomeini wanted Iran to be Islamic, not just because that's the perfect form of government in his opinion, but also because it's only under Islam that Iran will be genuinely independent. And I have a lot of anecdotes in the book about how he mixed the idea of independence and Islam in a way that is not separable. And I think these ideas are particularly very ardent in the view of the current leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, who's ruled over Iran for the past 36 years. And essentially, the Islamic Republic that we see now is his fingerprint. And Khamenei is an ardent anti-imperialist. He is committed to protecting Iran's independence from the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the driving force of the thinking in Iran's mind. Even after the most recent protests, after Iran suppressed very brutally these protests in January of 2026, in his first comments, Ayatollah Khamenei said that for the past 50 years, the United States has been wanting to subjugate Iran. That's his immediate reaction, that this is not about democracy, about economic problems, about sanctions. This is about a war with the United States, that Iran is in a war with the United States to protect its independence. First of all, it had to kick the United States out of Iran, the hostage crisis, which then deepened this sense that they are in a struggle with Iran. Yeah. Then Iran-Iraq war, which the Iranians saw as America's doing. First of all, the belief in the top was that Saddam invaded Iran with the encouragement and support of the West. And then Iran failed to win that war because of Western and American support for Saddam. So that's their theory. And again, I'm not saying this is objective history. I'm trying to lay out what the thinking is there.
Yeah.
And so the book's argument is that whether you look at Iran's forward defense in the Arab world, I mean, why is it that they need those bases in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Afghanistan? It all has to do with this ongoing war with the United States. And why is Iran pursuing this combative issue with the United States? Why does it see itself in this combat? It's all about maintaining Iran's sovereignty against the one superpower, which in the view of the revolution wants to undo that sovereignty and subjugate Iran. Now, also the book makes the argument that when you look at Iran internally, there are many facets about how the Islamic Republic has evolved in the past 47 years. But one issue that we have not paid adequate attention is how this war with the United States has actually shaped the Islamic Republic. In other words, it's not, in my opinion, it is less that Islamic ideology has shaped the Islamic Republic than it's this war with the United States that has shaped the Islamic Republic. I mean, in a way, Iran in its own mind is a country that has been at war for 47 years. Hot war, cold war, economic war, Iran-Iraq war, the Iraq issue, the war against ISIS, the war to save Bashar Assad, the wars in Lebanon vis-a-vis Israel, now the war between Israel and Iran directly, now the war between America and Iran directly. Iran has been at war for 47 years.
Wow.
And this war and this war footing and these ideas that underlie how Iran has got itself into this place has shaped Iran. I mean, first of all, economically, Iran today, both its poverty that has brought people into the streets, as well as the way in which you have these oligarchs that include Revolutionary Guards, but include clerical elements, includes their allies, etc., are product of the economic situation Iran finds itself in. If you looked at the political structure in Iran, it has been shaped around this. Why is the Revolutionary Guard so powerful? Revolutionary Guard was born of the Iran-Iraq war, became extremely powerful the more Iran found itself at war. The Quds Force was born as an empire as a consequence of Iran's decision to engage the United States in Iraq in order to prevent, in their eyes, as Ayatollah Khomeini put it to Bashar Assad, that the American crocodile would digest Iraq too easily and then turns its attention onto Iran.
Yes.
And then, the Quds Force became what we saw it became in the Arab world. And I think there are times in which that the leaders of Iran think Islamic ideology is important because they are at war with the United States. It's not the other way around, that because they're Islamists, they're fighting the US. It's because they're fighting the US that they need to be Islamist. The most senior clerical leader of the city of Mashhad, a gentleman by the name of Ayatollah Alam al-Huda, who's a very, very ardent, hardline cleric, very close to the supreme leader. At the time of the protest in Iran over hijab, he said that if we allowed Iranian youth to dress any which way they like and do whatever they want, then who is actually going to be of the mindset to defend this country?
Yeah.
Even the argument for him, who's a religious leader, for why hijab was mandatory, he didn't say because it's incumbent in the Sharia. He said it's because it's national security.
Yeah.
And I'll end with this. Even after these protests, but even if you looked at during the Mahsa Amini, the hijab protest in Iran, which supposedly was over a religious issue,
yeah,
that Ayatollah Khamenei, in maybe over 24 speeches that he gave after the protests broke down, only used the word Islam as an adjective for the name of the country. More often than not, he would say, this is a national security issue. This is because we're at war with the US. This is because, we are fighting. And so, to understand your adversary or to understand your neighbor, you have to understand how he's thinking.
Yes.
And rather than try to impose your own views on that thinking. And Iran has a conception of national interest and national security that has been largely shaped by its current leadership. But even if we want to understand the past 40 years, and particularly the legacy of Iran's role in the region, in the Arab world, the legacy of its confrontation with Israel and the US, we have to understand how did Iran come to this point.
Yeah.
And secondly, if we are trying to guess what is the mindset today as Iran calculates war with America, managing the Trump administration, going to negotiations over the nuclear issue or not, you have to understand what are the presupposition and the mindset on the other side. And so the book's attempt is, first of all, to capture an important dimension of the past 47 years in Iran. And then secondly, to actually try to unveil the thinking that has driven Iran to this point and is likely to continue to drive Iran forward until you have a different kind of an Islamic republic and or a completely different form of government in Iran that sees the Iran's national interest in a different light altogether.
Thank you, Vali. This is very clear and very straightforward argument about how the foreign policy of Iran should be understood. And I appreciate particularly taking us to the historical perspective and how the continuity of this foreign policy is shaping the future, which is something is missing from much of the argument that we hear in the media. Thank you. So let's turn to Mahjoob. And Mahjoob, please tell us, what's your thought on the argument on the book? Muted.
Thanks so much, Ibrahim, for the invitation, and thank you, Vali, for your presentation as well. I think the whole project is timely, and there is a need for serious debate about what Vali called it the political history of the Islamic Republic. I think the way how the book is designed is very clear, is putting together history with politics together, but also looking at what is happening within domestic politics of Iran as an important factor in shaping foreign policy. There is a huge debate about foreign policy of the Islamic Republic, and I think it is enough just to go back 10 days ago when Kharazi made a very interesting statement reviewing or basically criticizing the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic and say we made a mistake by exporting the revolution. We made a mistake by not paying attention to our neighboring countries. And we need to revise all of this attitude. I think, and he was describing Iran's foreign policy is basically it's like testing and تجربة الخطأ والصح, testing and let's say wrong or right. It's not based on a theory, not based on a very clear vision. It's very interesting someone like Kamal Kharrazi to come and talk about foreign policy in a gathering where all of the foreign policy's body of politicians of Iran are there, from diplomats to other people. I think as someone lived in Iran for 4 years and engaged with the Iranian intellectual politicians and travel around Iran and work on Iran for nearly now 25 years, I think it's very clear that the leadership of Iran, from Khomeini to Khamenei, they were driven by history when they run Iran's today. And here I want to bring to the attention how Khomeini believes about the Mashrutiyat, or the revolution, the constitutional revolution in 1906, which is basically being thought as a base for the Islamic revolution, as Abrahamian called it in his book, Iran Between Two Revolutions, and he's referring to 1906 revolution with the constitutional revolution and the Islamic revolution. And why I'm bringing those two together? Because it's about the perception, how Iran perceives itself and how the other is perceiving Iran. And the leaders of Iran, they shape their own foreign policy. I mean, when Khomeini was asked why you are reading Ahmed Kasrav's book, which is an important book about constitutional revolution, he said, I don't want this to be repeated in Iran. Why? Because in 1906, clerks had been removed from the whole political scene. Khomeini wants the whole Islamic Republic to be run and the decision-making to be made by the clerks. Why this is important? Because first of all, religious aspects can be secured. Secondly, he wants to make sure that what happened to the religious circle in Iran never been repeated as 1906. And here we have to look at Iran's foreign policy in this context. From day one, Khomeini wants Iran to be seen differently. He doesn't want history to be repeated, but also he doesn't want Iran to be seen as the others. Iran is as a geopolitics is a different nation. And he tried to define the national interest of Iran based off his call for defending Muslims around the world, or mustadafin, or the weak people who are in need. And that itself basically defining what I call it the identity of the Islamic Republic, which is, I think, for 8 years of the war, he insisted on that. And what we gather from that, the export of the revolution. But not only this, there is another aspect comes to that, which basically has to deal with what Iran can present to the others. And they talk about Muslims. He tried to present Iran as a model. And that is what's being said about the Ummul Qura of Muslim world. That's what Larijani called it, the brother of Ali Larijani. That principle itself, that making Iran as the center of Muslim world. And that itself is an important principle for the foreign policy of Iran. And that itself also is important on shaping all of their behavior. What's interesting on what Kamal Kharrazi is saying now, as he's saying, actually, all of this was mistake. All of this was wrong. We should not do that. We should do something differently in the past so we don't reach to the point now we are in. The second point I want to highlight, which is basically, I think, on the chapters of the book where Vali talks about um, uh, the Iraq-Iran war. I do agree that this war has contributed at least 50 years extra to the age of Islamic Republic. I always said that. Because if this war was not there, there was a huge conflict within the group who were behind the revolution. It could end to the failing of the whole project. But that war itself did contribute to this consolidating power, which Khomeini succeeded in doing so. And I think that itself brought Iran to this kind of leadership, where Khamenei now is running the country for 36 years, and more than 6 presidents basically were ruling Iran under his leadership. And all of this happening without major change on foreign policy. I would say, when I say major, moving beyond ideology, moving beyond the red lines. There are two milestones on those 36 years. The first one was when he decided, when he agreed on accepting the reformist as effective body, effective player within domestic politics of Iran. That was 1997, where Mohammad Khatami came. But after 8 years, he couldn't absorb the experience, where he immediately pushed to go back to the religious conservative circle where Mahmoud Ahmadinejad were running the country. That was the first step, and he was trying to show that he is more open to the change of Iran. That was the first step. The second one, when he basically in October 2018, when he decided that this is the time to what he calls at that time the second step of the Islamic Revolution. What he meant at that time, that now it's important to bring a young generation of Iranian people so they can move the revolution. And that I call it the rebirth of Iran. Why? Because he was trying to present himself as a supreme leader and present the revolution that it is moving beyond challenges, beyond sanctions, beyond American pressure, beyond regional pressure. He wants to say in 2018 that Iran is resilient, is strong enough, so no one can weaken Iran. So those who think that because of America would withdraw from the nuclear deal, that Iran will be weak, they are mistaken. People who think that our generation, our elder generation, some of them died, some of them they cannot run the country. We have a new generation, and he wants to say the revolution is embedded within the Iranian generations. And I think that itself needs a lot of discussion. I'm not sure, is he aware of the young population of Iran, what they believe about the revolution, what they believe about Islamic revolution itself. I think those two steps have shown us that the supreme leader is trying to do what I call it the second level of consolidating power and running the country. I would argue now, and I hope Vali can comment on that, I think he's a hesitant supreme leader. He missed a lot of opportunities when it comes to foreign policy to fix the relation with the United States, to fix the relation about the nuclear issue in different years. And I think that hesitation may cost Iran a lot. And I was looking at his decision-making process since he became the supreme leader. It becomes to me very clear that he's a hesitant leader. He's not a decisive on the time. He immediately, when there is a risk, he's going back to ideology. He's going back to show to the military base and to religious base. That's Iran. Just I finish with this note, Ibrahim.
Yeah, thank you.
I think this book is bringing to the reader, I would say, a comprehensive and well written, I would say, details about what happened in Iran, in the last 47 years, and how Iran got to where Iran is now, considering the history, considering the perception matter when it comes to foreign policy, and also considering the ideology itself. And here, I would say the conflict between an Iranian identity and Islamic identity, and how those are actually used sometimes to justify foreign policy in this country, but not doing it in that country. For example, in a country like Azerbaijan, you talk about national identity and national interest of Iran, despite the fact that they are Shia. But when you talk to Arab, you talk about Islamic identity, Shia identity, because they are a Sunni world. And that itself, of course, an open for discussion. But I'm happy that, Ibrahim, that brought this book for discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahjoob. Really appreciate also your historian perspective. You as a prominent historian, and history in Vali's book is at the center of this argument. So I very much enjoyed and learned from your historical perspective also on the book. Before I ask questions, I would like to ask if Vali would like to comment any on what Mahjoob said, or if you want, I can go with the questions.
No, I think Mahjoob raised very important issues about Iran. And also some of these issues are now, as he mentioned, regarding former Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi, are actually being openly debated in Iran, in universities, in journals, but also among the elite. And as I said, it's a very peculiar thing about Iran that all of these kinds of things are in the open. In other words, criticizing foreign policy, suggesting new paths forward, criticizing nuclear policy, they're all out there. And I think what the points he raises about the Supreme Leader are important. I would say, I would not use the word hesitant in the sense that he is committed to this worldview that he has. There is not hesitating. This war with the United States, the fact that the US is Iran's enemy, that the US wants to undo the revolution, you cannot have peace with the US. This is sort of so hard and boiled in him that that's the one thing that he doesn't waver from. But Mahjoob is correct that he's willing to make all sorts of other compromises in order to stay the course, including most recently, for instance, giving up on hijab in Iran. In a sense that his top priority is to keep the ship steady rather than do that. But I think these are all extremely important points. But all of and I agree with Mahjoob, these all sort of raise the issue that we need to look beyond simplistic views of Iran and to look at what is the motivation and the debate that's driving this country. So I greatly appreciate his deep reading of the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Vali. And I'm glad that you mentioned. Yes, Mahjoob.
I mean, how you describe Vali, the behavior of the Supreme is not hesitant. How do you describe his decision making or the way how he behaves at the current situation?
Well, I mean, at least in my view, he's very fixed on the actual goal, but then he's willing to delegate on the implementation to different people, and he also raises people to the top that share that point of view or are loyal to that. In other words, in 1997, that you pointed to, something like 20% of Revolutionary Guard voted for the reformist President Khatami. After that, he purged the Revolutionary Guards. So the commanders that came to the top are commanders that share in this national security point of view. Some of them may not be very religious in that sense, but they are ardent in that sense of the view. So, I think he's willing to make all sorts of compromises in order to keep moving things forward. Like when it was necessary under Rouhani, he agreed to a nuclear negotiations because he thought that would relieve some sanctions in Iran. He was not willing to give up the ultimate goal and normalize with the US, but he was willing to do a limited nuclear deal. I think that's what he's willing to do now. So he will tell his foreign minister, Araghchi, you can go to Geneva. You can only talk about the nuclear issue, and these are the parameters you can agree to, right? And we're not, and what's not on the table, which I think President Trump would very much like to be on the table, is a path to normalization. I mean, I think if I were to guess, President Trump wants to see an Ahmad al-Sharra in Iran.
Yeah.
Somebody who says, yes, I used to be a Salafi, but now I'm going to wear a tie and I'm going to go down a different path. But Khamenei is definitely the opposite of Ahmad al-Sharra. In other words,
I think Trump wants to see many Ahmad al-Shara'is in the region. Ahmad al-Shara'is everywhere.
that's true. Wherever he sees an enemy, he wants to see an Ahmad al-Sharra. But
Yes.
but I think that's where I think is fixed. And I would just add one thing. I think the word hesitant in Iran comes up interestingly. There are those who argue that he has been too soft in responding to the US when Soleimani was killed, when Ismail al-Haniya was killed, when Nasrallah was killed, when America bombed Iran's nuclear sites. There are those who say that when it came to that moment where there was a very direct challenge to Iran, his tough talk was not followed by actually really daring action. And if you think about it, the most daring actions like Iran did vis-a-vis the US, like the attack on the Marine barracks in Lebanon, came when Khomeini was the supreme, the head of Iran. Yes, Khomeini was president, but the idea that you actually would attack the Americans directly and kill 500 Marines, right? It was that kind of a thing Khomeini has shied away from.
Yeah.
So it's a very sort of a calculated, as Mahjoob puts it, hesitant, but nevertheless confrontational posture to the US. And it's not working with Trump anymore. I think Mahjoob, your point is his strategy of managing the situation has fallen apart. For many years after Trump came out of the nuclear deal, he told people in Iran that his strategy was no deal, no war. That Iran could just stay in the middle of no deal and no war. And now Iran has no deal and it has war. Right? So in a way, it hasn't worked. And I think we're in a situation we're in, not only because Iran is been weakened by the loss of Syria, by the loss of Hezbollah, by the loss of its nuclear program by and large, but it's also weakened because Khamenei's strategic assumptions have not worked. The situation that Iran survived in is that Hezbollah will control Israel. That Syria will support Hezbollah and Syria will control Israel. And somehow Iran could stay in this no war, no peace situation with the US is not working. And so I think he's struggling, Mahjoob, to try to basically be able to maintain the situation.
Maybe occupied. Maybe he's occupied by the legacy. He's in 80s now. He doesn't want history to mention him as a weak or someone who basically did not do enough to protect the Islamic Republic. I think he believes what he's doing is amazing. But the legacy, he's occupied by the legacy. And he's a religious leader, and he wants his name to be mentioned in a gold letters.
Absolutely. And I would add to it that, in our region, we're familiar with it. Rulers that have been there for a very long time are not the change agents. Change comes after them. After you've said something for 36 years, you're not going to be the one who says, I'm going to change course. And also, people like him watch the Shah do exactly that and collapse. I mean, the Shah, at the end, when the revolution started, tried to all of a sudden become a reformer. And it didn't work. So, Khamenei is now, if you would, is a prisoner of his own legacy. And you're absolutely correct.
Well, I'm really delighted with this natural flow of the conversation. Probably there is no role for me. I mean, you can.
No, you are the boss. You are the boss.
So I will have to claim my role and jump in with a question. No, I really like that. Thank you, guys. You argue, Vali, that resistance is kind of like the organizing logic of Iran's grand strategy or foreign policy, which is fine for people here in the region. However, analysts of Iran's foreign policy struggle, right, between what is resistance and what is expansion. right? So where do we draw the line? What is resistance and what is expansion? Because there is a lot of struggle about understanding this issue. So how do you help us understand where we draw the line on what is resistance and what is expansion?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And the line is both subjective and also is always blurry. In other words, what to Iran is defensive, to the Arabs is offensive.
Yeah.
What I mean, this is also something, for instance, we can think about Israel. It says it's protecting its security, but how far in the Arab world does it have to go to protect its security?
Yeah.
So what Israel sees as a security parameter by the Arabs is seen as occupation, as expansion, right?
Yeah.
Now, and I think something like that applies here. In other words, Iran, even after the Iran-Iraq war, thought that it cannot defend its borders without a proper military, that the West would not help it build by not giving it weaponry, and that it had to be inside Iraq to defend itself. So it pursued 6 years of trying to overthrow Saddam and capture Basra, etc., in order to create a beachhead over there. And now it has a view that, okay, if we control Iraq through its government, through the militias, through Hashd al-Shabi, we can deny Iraq to America as a base against Iran, or we can avoid another attack on Iran, either from a hostile Iraqi government or from things like ISIS coming over the border into Iran. But to Iraqis themselves, even to Shia Iraqis now, this is not acceptable, because Iran is basically putting the pillars of its defense in another country. Even though the logic in Iran may sound perfectly sound, that we're defending ourselves, but in reality, to the Arab world and even to Iraqis themselves, or to the current even Iraqi government, Iraqi Shia leadership, this is infringement on their independence. Iranian, deep down, they viewed Hezbollah for many decades as a air defense system against Israel.
Yeah.
If you really thought about it, why didn't Israel hit Iran 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? It only did so after it dismantled Hezbollah. But to Lebanese, it's unacceptable that you basically use a chunk of our country as part of your defense mechanism. So I think, the dilemma that Kharrazi points to, aside from the idea of export of revolution at the very beginning, even the sort of a secular idea of an Iranian security parameter that assumes that it's necessary for Iran to be in the Arab world, create proxies, have quasi-territorial control in order to protect itself, is unacceptable and is seen as aggression, right? And I would say that even there are ways you can think that even in the minds of the generals who are running these policies, Soleimani, Qa'ani, etc., there's a thin line between defense and offense.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, and I think Iran has had, and I would say this, even if in terms of purely military logic this makes sense, in terms of Iran's foreign policy logic, it doesn't, because it alienated the Arab world. It pushed them in the direction of Israel. It pushed them in the direction of America. And you see this being criticized. For instance, when Foreign Minister Zarif stepped down after the Rouhani government, he had some controversial media interviews in which he complained about the conflict between diplomacy and what he called Maidan, which in Iran is a euphemism for revolutionary guards, especially on Syria. He basically said that, here we are trying to negotiate a nuclear deal, and here you are alienating the Arab world to the extent that they becomes enemies of the nuclear deal and lobby with the United States to come out of the nuclear deal. So I think Iranians now realize that, this, and I think it's a very interesting phenomenon that the collapse of Hezbollah and Syria has damaged this idea that Iran can successfully defend itself from the Arab world. Israel has undone that. And now this makes it easier for Arabs and Iranians to actually normalize. Right? That's partly because of the idea of Maidan, this sort of battlefield that the Quds Force imagined is becoming undone.
Yeah.
So I think that Iran's adversaries are correct to see this as aggression. But in Iran's thinking, this all at least started with the idea of defense. But it's a problematic idea of defense that it alienated Iran's enemies, and now we can actually see it's not even sustainable. The idea that you can sit in another country indefinitely and assume that you can defend yourself from there doesn't work.
No. The other dilemma we struggle with, Valley, is what is regime's interest and what is Iran's national interest? Are they separable? Where do we draw
It's
the
a
line
very
between the two? How do
no,
they
it's
overlap?
yeah, no. Actually, it is the question of the moment in Iran because the opposition to the Islamic Republic, which actually has grown, that segment of Iranians that went into the streets, or you see them in outside of Iran, basically they say Iran's national interest is not in pursuing muqawama. Not in pursuing resistance. I mean, there are two schools here. I mean, there are those who reject muqawama. You could count them among secular Iranians outside, inside. And there are those who now say muqawama's time is past because it's unsustainable and it's too expensive. It's time to change course.
Very nice.
So they basically are arguing that either the Islamic Republic's conception of Iran's national security is not in our national interest, or that we should change our national interest. But we also have to note that in the minds of the Revolutionary Guards or Khamenei, there is no difference between regime and Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true of every dictatorship around the world. I mean, we could say that about Putin and Russia. You know, is it really Russia's national interest to be going to war with America and Europe?
Yeah.
Many Russians may say no, but Putin and his, coterie don't see a difference between regime and country. This is largely a conception of opponents and the West. And so again, as analysts, we have to be very careful to separate political rhetoric from analysis.
Yes.
And so when Khamenei is sitting over there, I don't think he's thinking just about regime survival. He sees himself as the custodian of Iran, whether we accept him or Iranians accept him or not.
Sure.
So he basically sees himself in that role. And if you're going to, as Mahjoob put it on the table, if you're going to look at his calculations, you have to sort of say that's the way he's thinking about this. And then you can say, how can you influence decision making?
Yeah. Okay.
Can I add something to this?
Go ahead, Mahjoob.
When Khatami came as a president of Iran, one of his agenda was to, I would say, move the foreign policy toward what's so-called the national interest of Iran, where he tried to improve the foreign policy of Iran and relations with neighboring country. I mean, the honeymoon of Saudi-Iranian relation were under Khatami, as you know, Vali. But who stopped him, actually, is Khamenei and the circle around Khamenei. Because at that time, they perceived this as an approach making Islamic Republic more vulnerable. They don't want to have a normal relation defined by national interest, which basically you can talk about, country to country, government to government. I think it was clear to the Supreme Leader that he wants the upper hand. No one equal me as a leader, no one. So my opinion and my reference on matters is different from any president. And I think, I lived there for years when Khatami was in power. I was following his discourse about foreign policy when he visited different Arab countries, when he discussed more important matters about Hezbollah, about other, all what's so-called the proxies of Iran. He has different opinion, but they stopped him. They actually tried to marginalize him. Actually, and then they destroyed his whole project. When Ahmadinejad came, we went back to the 1980s discourse.
Thank you, Mahjoob. Now, the question before the last one. We, Valley, in the Arab Society for Conflict Studies, we are interested in the understanding of conflict and resolution of it. So, based on your very thorough, strong understanding of Iran's grand strategy, what implications do you think this has for us in the understanding of conflict and the resolution of it? Conflict and conflict resolution. What does this understanding of strategy tell us? What should we gather from this as conflict specialists?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're not at the end. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes we're not at the
Yeah.
end in Gaza, we're not at the end in Lebanon, Syria, and we're not at the end with Iran. And I think it's actually a very interesting period because the Arab world in its collectivity, including countries that even don't have relations with Iran, like Egypt and Jordan, for instance, have all engaged in basically trying to find a way in which that this region does not enter another massive conflict that can consume it for decades to come and impact its economy, security, etc. And so there is a very interesting process by which that the Arab world is trying to deepen its engagement with Iran, deepen its diplomatic relations,
Great. Yes.
basically to buy to get a greater degree of influence and understanding in Tehran, to be able to be a more effective interlocutor.
Yeah.
It already has a deep relationship in the West that it can bring to bear in here. For instance, just a few weeks ago when the United States was imminently going to attack Iran, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was very instrumental in averting an imminent war. Not out of love of Iran, but out of national interest for the region. It says we in Iran and in the Arab world say it's not for the Hubb Ali, but for Muawiyah.
Yes.
But it's a very good, actually, it's a very good way of approaching it. It's not, in other words, a conflict resolution here is not charity. It's based on Arab national interest. And it's the very first time in a very long period of time that somehow Arab national interest collectively is working somewhat more independently than American agenda in order to take ownership for the future of the region. Now, as I said, we're not at the end. I don't know how much success they would have, how much they would shape it, but I think this is a very, very good development.
Excellent.
For the region. I mean, there are some positive signs. So Iran and Saudi Arabia have had, at least under the revolution, decades of great hostility. Efforts, even before Khatami, by Rafsanjani, who met with, had a security agreement in 1986 with Prince Abdullah then, and then Khatami, and then, Rouhani's Hope Initiative, etc. As you're right, they were all undone by Khamenei and IRGC. But they did manage a rapprochement with the help of China 3 years ago, which has held to this day.
Yeah.
Right? So we're now in 4 years of whatever they agreed on Yemen, on normalization, has for now held. So the next level can be built on these 3 years. And 3 years is too short against the background of 47 years of 44 years of conflictual relationship. But I think it's a very good beginning for the region. It's a model to go forward. So, I think the region is going through a very dangerous and difficult period.
Yeah.
Not just because of Iran alone, but because also the Gaza war, what's happened in Syria, in Lebanon, the balance of power in the region, the way in which President Trump is approaching the region, all of it has basically changed a lot of fundamental rules in the region. And Iran is part of that. So I would say we still have lessons to learn, but I'm very, very encouraged by the direction of things, and particularly by the ownership that the Arab world has taken of trying to find peaceful resolutions to somewhere better for the region.
Yeah, well, thank you. I totally agree with you, actually, and I'm impressed with your conflict analysis. And we should invite you to the Arab Society for Conflict.
It would be my pleasure. It would be my pleasure.
Thank you. I'm in total agreement with your conflict analysis. And if I may add, also, I'm making the argument lately about this is that maybe or the region or countries in the region were not interested in the role of Iran as playing as a hegemon in the region, but they are definitely now interested or should be in Iran being part of the political environment for the balance of the regional order and for the interest. And I like also what you mentioned is that conflict resolution is also interest based, and there is an opportunity for mutual interest, Iran and the region, is that in order to achieve a balanced regional order, Iran should continue to be a major player in the region. So not to end up as having the upper hand for Israel in the region, and then we enter into a new cycle of imbalanced regional order and all that. So there is definitely, and I think some of the countries are understanding this and working on that. So the last question that, and then I will leave it to the both of you to comment on it, is that where are we going from here with the negotiations with the U.S. and how do you see the future? Are we moving into an agreement, or what's your thought on this? Where are we going from here? Final thoughts for both of you.
I mean, I think a broad-based agreement, something similar to the 2015 JCPOA, is not likely in the short term. And I think for the reason, most important reason, is that Iran lacks trust. The thinking, particularly in the top circle around Khamenei, is that, this is a president who, first of all, walked away from a deal that the United States had signed and Iran had implemented. That's the way they see it, without doing its part. So there is no trust in signing a deal with the U.S. that even if you signed with the United States, that the U.S. will not just pocket whatever you give it and then walk away from the deal once more. And so the second is that this is also a president who, in the middle of negotiations, gave a green light to Israel to attack Iran, and then himself decided to bomb Iran's leverage at the negotiating table. So, what if he decides to bomb us again in the middle of the negotiations, or he bombs us right after the negotiations, or right after we implemented a deal? Right? So that trust issue is very, very huge in Iran. It's more than now the terms of the deal. So it's not a question of what the U.S. would give for zero enrichment, or what the U.S. would give for getting Iran's enriched uranium. The question is, how can the U.S. actually convince Iran that the deal is solid, it should trust the deal, it should invest in a deal. The second is that Iranians are now more convinced that Israel has a veto over the process, much more so than they were in 2015. Because Israel attacked Iran in the middle of the negotiations. And even as President Trump's been talking about a deal, Prime Minister Netanyahu rushed to Washington to basically try to put his imprint on where the negotiations would go. So essentially, now there are two people in the room, and then there is somebody outside the room that Iran is not talking to, but who could actually influence the deal. So that makes deal making much more difficult. And then I would say, Iran also wants an honorable outcome. So if President Trump insists on absolute surrender, irrespective of, we don't know even what he's willing to give in exchange for absolute surrender, I don't think Khamenei, based on everything Mahjoob said about him, is going to accept that. Excellent. And then finally, I would say the thing that particularly also Arab world and everything we talked about has to keep in mind is Iran is in the middle of succession. It already was before the 12-day war, before Gaza started. It's accelerated. Khamenei is 86 years old. He may be targeted in the next Israeli-American attack. And, everything about Iran is also preparing the country for what comes next. And so, if Iran signs on to a deal, it would be to create breathing space for succession. If it doesn't sign on to a deal, it's because also it impacts how the succession would come about. And I think for the Arab world, part of the idea of engaging Iran right now is also with a view to have a say and to have a role and to have a relationship with what comes after in Iran. And so I think the stakes are very high, but I'm not hopeful about a deal. I think the only positive thing I can say is that it seems that neither the United States wants a big war, nor does Iran want a big war. That's about the only thing that would say that gives them motivation towards some kind of a at least interim deal.
Thank you. I really appreciate the comments, and I agree totally with you on the need for finding an honorable solution to this, because otherwise, it's also, since we talked a lot history also in this conversation, history in Iran's collective memory and collective thinking and national pride is very important. And unless you address this issue, I don't think we will be close to a deal. Thank you. Mahjoob, final comments?
Well, I think Islamic Republic of Iran has faced two major political shocks in the last 20 years. The first one, Arab uprising, and the second one is the Tufan al-Aqsa, what happened 7th of October. I think the two developments, the Islamic Republic have failed to adopt its own foreign policy with all of this. And now this is the moment where they have to pay the price. And here I see, first of all, I think the region does not want Iran to be the police of the region, like the Shah, and they don't want also to see Iran intervening on their business. And now, with 9 Arab Muslim countries engaging to push the war, I think it's an opportunity for Islamic Republic to engage with the region, and that could be an opportunity also to depend on the regional players to build or offer opportunity for peace and stability. And I think this could be used as a base to find an exit strategy of the current situation. Personally, I'm not optimistic about the situation for two reasons. Number one, the whole confrontation now is motivated by what Netanyahu is saying. The demonization of Iran, the demonization, considering Iran as the crown of victory. He wants to do something to Iran, so he claimed that he has done what to do list after 7th of October. Will complicate most of the solutions. I think most importantly, I think the leadership of Iran still believe that they have, I would say, place to maneuver on. They can make the war more complicated to the Americans by saying, okay, the war will be a regional war. But here, I think with all of this pressure, it seems that Trump is insisting on a war with Iran. Now, my question is, or what I talk to myself is, the scale of the war and what does he want? Does he want to basically regime change, or actually he wants to take Iran like Iraq 1991 to what I call it the tunnel of the collapse, where more sanctions, more political pressure, more isolations, and then leave the regime suffers for another 10, 15 years until something from within Iran can emerge. But I don't see now a potential of a solution, considering the elephant in the room, which is Israel. Israel is pushing hardly towards the war, and I do see the real pressure is between the 9 Arab Muslim countries and Israel. Those push no for the war, and Netanyahu push for absolutely war and confrontation.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Vali and Mahjoob. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I learned a lot from it. I wholeheartedly thank you for this and for the really interesting flow of discussion and conversation, and about this thought-provoking book. So as we conclude, Iran's Grand Strategy book challenges us not simply to interpret Iran's behavior, but to interrogate the analytical lenses through which we understand power, order, and resistance in the Middle East. Whether one agrees with Vali Nasr or not, this book compels us to move beyond reductionism toward a more rigorous engagement with the strategy, structure, and historical memory. From me, Ibrahim Frehat, the founding president of the Arab Society for Conflict Studies, thank you all for joining us, and I hope this conversation continues in our classrooms, our scholarship, and our policy debates. I hope we did justice for this book in an hour event and a book launch. We tried our best, but the book has a lot to offer, more about the ideas that we discussed. So thank you, Vali, for your time writing this book and sharing your thoughts with us and being with us today. And thank you, Mahjoob, for your comments as a discussant on the book and on the engagement of the discussion with Vali. Thank you all, and I hope to have to continue this conversation in the future about our other subjects, maybe other new books that you will be writing in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.